Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Hope you've had a great day on this beautiful Sunday. We are having a little bit better weather with the 30s. It's better than like below zero and so forth. But anyway, today I thought what I wanted to do, just a really short video on the idea and notion that in watercolor you have choices of how you want to do your watercolor. You can do it wet on wet, wet on dry, and then, you know, dry, just basically just some paint on dry, and it would kind of scrape across. So today, let's just look at a few of these things, and I'm also going to use a round brush, and I'm going to use a flat one. So this won't be very long, just a small video that talks about all those sorts of things. And I hope my lighting is good enough for you to see. So let's start with the flat brush. I'm going to first start with a little section here that I'm going to wet with water. So we're going to be doing this little block. So I'm blocking out here, and this would be called wet on wet. So I wet my paper. I come over to a color. Let's grab green. A little water on my brush. And I'm going to put that color on here, and as you can see, it's moving and it's doing something. As they say, it's moving and grooving. But do you see what I have a little slant to my paper. I don't have it flat down. Now if I chose to add, say, let's take some yellow ochre, and I choose to add it in there, it's also going to move. As the paper dries, the coloring in the water won't spread anymore. If you zoom in, you'll be able to see how the water, if I move the paper, it'll move the water. But if you zoom in and watch the paint in the water, you'll see it do its thing. Now, that's with a flat brush. I can also add another color in there. I can go in, take red, dab it in. Look what happens. Oh, that is the magic of the watercolor. That's the magic. You see? And I mean, you can create some really beautiful designs just doing that. So again, you can just keep doing that as long as you want to. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another section here, but I'm not going to put any water down. I'm just going to put my color with a wet brush. I do have a wet brush. This is a red. And if you notice, when I first put it down, it's very pigmented. When I come down with it, it lightens and lightens, which is a whole nother kind of teaching. Even though I did not wet the page first, I'll go back into, oops, wrong color. I'll go back into some yellow and I'll drop it in there. Because my brush is wet, the water is going to move. Not the same as this one. I can blend it and it's going to spread a little bit, not a lot, because there's no water underneath, but there is water on my brush, which makes it, you know, wet. So let me add, here's some purple. Because the water is there on my brush, making it wet, it's going to move around and spread. Just a little differently than it does here. Okay, so now, if I really dry off my brush, I meant to get another piece of paper here. I'm going to wipe my brush off so it's basically dry. I'm going to go into my color. It's not really all that wet. And I'm going to come over here. Whoops, I guess I need a little bit more color. We use blue. You see, I got to have a little bit of water on my brush to move it around. But basically, you could also do this dry brushing. It gives you that, you know, kind of scratching across the paper. But see the difference in how that looks? Now, I can still, if I wanted to, I could actually just use drops of water. And that's not gonna move very much because it really was just dry on dry. If I come over here and add drops of water, because there's a lot more water going on, it's moving a lot more. I come over here and I do the same thing. There's a lot of water going on, so it's going to be different. But you see there's something happening there. Best thing to do would be to really zoom in to see the action that's taking place. So you have choices in watercolor. You have choices whether you want to, you know, go wet on wet, wet on dry, dry and dry. It's all up to you, and you can do all of them in one painting, or a couple of them in one painting. Now let's use the round brush, and we'll do the same thing. I'm going to wet my paper here. Get it pretty wet. You know, this little block, because we're doing the wet on wet. So get it pretty wet. Put a little more water on your brush if you want to. Come over here into this. And this is gonna, you know, you can do whatever design you want. And it's just gonna kind of move around, do what it wants to do, which this is such a beautiful color. So you got that. Okay, now I'm going to take that color off. I'm not going to do much of, not going to take much water off my brush, just going to kind of wipe it off a little. And I'll go into some orange. Put that in there. You can get a little more water and just sort of shake it on there, and it's going to move everything all around. Move the color. Another thing I wanted to mention was that you see how I only wet or worked in blocked areas. This is only going to run so far, even though it's wet on wet, because around it it's all dry. If my whole paper was wet, then everything would just be blending all in together, which in itself can be very beautiful. Okay, so now we're going to do the paper's not going to be wet, but my brush will be wet. So let's go in and take the blue again. Blue is such a strong color. Whoops, let's get a lot more than that on there. My brush is quite wet, but the paper's dry, and around it is dry. So it's going to move a little bit, which is so beautiful. Another beautiful color. It's not going to move around as much. If I lift the paper up, these things would all, look at, this is going to, look at that. That just fell right into that one, and that's dripping down. So these are the effects that can go on with watercolors. It's simply amazing. Let's in with the blue. Excuse me. Let's take a green. No, I think it's a brown. It's okay. And we're just going to swiggle that all around on top of that blue with the wet on dry. It's not going to go very far. It will spread a bit, but it's not going to, you know, go crazy, and it's not going to come down off the page. Maybe if I was to lift my paper, but no, not really. It's not going to move much. But you still get that effect that you get with the movement of water and watercolor. Now if we come over here, whoops, I didn't want to wet that. And we don't wet anything. And we have a pretty dry brush, just enough water on it to get, you know, some paint on there. You see how much stronger? And it's not going to move wherever I put it. You might want to get some on your towel and just sort of wipe it on a cloth. It's going to stay just like that. It's not going to move and blend much at all because it's dry on dry. Now I can still add another color, even so, but it's not going anywhere. It's basically dry on dry. I mean, the paint underneath it was a bit wet, but if I let it dry, I could go back over it, and it would basically it won't go anywhere because you're not using water. The water is what causes the movement, hence watercolor. And I can continue to, you know, add a color on top of a color. Whoop, that was yellow, which did that work out very well. Let's put some red in there. See that? You can blend. You can still blend, but it's not going anywhere. It's not spreading. So it's all a choice of yours. With this brush, I wasn't going to do that, but I think I will. What I'm going to do, and it works the same with a flat brush or whatever kind of brush. I'm going to go into my red, and on this dry, I'm going to make some petals. So you can see what it looks like within an object. Okay, that's on the dry. Now let's do a real wet brush on the dry paper. This one I had a lot of pigment on my brush. This one I do not. But my brush is a lot wetter. So comes out differently. Now I'm going to come over here and wet this little section. It is kind of wet anyway from the, and my brush is quite wet. And the moment I put my brush down, everything starts moving because there's water underneath there. Another couple of things you can do is go in like that, take some color out. But that's not really what this is about today. So as you can see, there's just different ways to use watercolor. And they're all beautiful, no matter, you know, how you use them, no matter whether I do this as well. I'm sorry, I stopped in the middle of my sentence. I do this as well. After I wet it and wipe it off, I massage the tips, and I do the same thing. I flatten them out. It really does help and save your brushes. So it just kind of form them again, and it really keeps your brushes much nicer. So I hope this was, you know, helpful in some sort of way. It's just a little, my videos will be very beginner friendly because I know how daunting it was for me when I first started learning watercolor, and the reason why I took so long to learn it, because I was afraid of it. I wasn't really afraid of it, but I didn't know what to do or how to do it, or it seemed daunting. First suggestion, don't do what I did and wait forever, because you can do it. It just takes learning, practice, that's all, like anything else. Secondly, second piece of advice, don't let anybody tell you that you can't, or you shouldn't, or whatever. And don't let anybody tell you what kind of technique or whatever you want. You're the painter. You can learn the techniques and all that, and then you apply them the way you want to apply them, because you're the artist. So anyway, this is my short little tutorial for today. Check out my other tutorials. I have a new channel. Unfortunately, my old one I had years ago, which I had to let go for life reasons. But I decided again that I was going to start it up again with just painting. That one had a lot of different things in it. This is just painting, and it's just painting with watercolor and or jelly gouache, or together. Right now, this is just watercolor. Another thing is it dries pretty fast. These are almost, you know, give them a little while longer, they'll be dry. These are pretty much dry. The wets are going to take a while because they're wet. So anyway, have a really great rest of your evening, folks, and bye for now.